Ready to tackle the topics that you've been curious about but never felt comfortable asking? With a straightforward, no-nonsense perspective on life, blended with candid stories and a healthy dose of humor, Dr. Mary Grimberg cuts through the fluff and addresses the conversations we all need to have on TMI Talk, where no subject is too taboo. Our bodies, our minds, and everything in between. Now here's your host, Dr. Mary.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to TMI Talk with Dr. Mary. Today, we're going to be talking about burnout in the workplace and how it affects our health. And today, we have Dr. Meredith Grossman, who is a practicing physical therapist in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the founder of Health Care Unraveled. The project was started in July 2022 as a tool to combat her own burnout. It has since grown into an educational and coaching platform to help other healthcare workers overcome their burnout and build fulfilling careers. Thank you so much for being here, Meredith.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I thought you were the perfect person to talk about this. I know a lot of your focus is on healthcare, but it can really go universal with other industries and things like that. So I thought it'd be good to chat with you about how I think people don't realize how much showing up in an unhealthy workplace or a workplace without boundaries affects their bodies and their health. And so I'd love to dive in and understand a little bit about your journey and how you got to this direction as a physical therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true that I really have focused on, burnout in the healthcare space, but we know that burnout is a problem across industries, especially in recent years with COVID, and how that has affected people's kind of work environments. But I got started with kind of being interested in this topic a couple years into my career, experiencing burnout myself and also seeing a lot of people around me experience burnout in my first workplace. And it was a situation where we kind of, everyone sort of knew that they were burnt out. It wasn't really on my radar going into this job. I was really kind of focused on the fact that it didn't have a super high patient volume. I thought that would be kind of enough to inherently protect me from burning out. And so as I was just getting into a place where I was exhausted, I felt like I just could not recover from a work day, a work week. And again, I was seeing a lot of other people experience it at the same time. I was just sort of, it just got me to wondering, like, what is really going on here? And why don't we know more about this? Why don't we know kind of what to do about this? Which led me down like a research path of starting to kind of just understand not only burnout itself, but also the dynamics of my field specifically that contribute to it.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like in healthcare, it's almost normalized, this toxicity, these environments where if you speak up or have boundaries or, you're almost like an outlier. I noticed that for myself as I was like a troublemaker and I'm like, I don't want to work, more than the 40 hours I'm getting paid for. Is that really that hard? And I don't want to treat 20 patients a day. I feel like that's a disservice to them. And, it's a tough thing to navigate because it's the healthcare system is not great in a variety of ways. But yeah, I think that it's funny. I think in any industry, I think it's normalized. So you, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I am just really struggling and I feel like nobody else is, I can guarantee you they are. They're just dealing with it and they're not understanding how it's affecting their bodies yet. There's a breaking point at some point.
Absolutely. And kind of to the topic of your podcast, I think it is something that is still sort of taboo to talk about openly, especially with other people in the workplace. Like we don't see a lot of open conversations happening about the ways that the dynamics of the workplace are contributing to people's to people suffering and having issues with their energy, with their health, etc. And because of that, I think a lot of people do feel isolated or feel like there's something wrong with them specifically, when in reality, the prevalence numbers that we see again across industries are extremely high for people really struggling with to sustain a work life, to sustain themselves in an organization.
Yeah, these big, especially like these bigger, I mean, it's not even just corporate. It can be any business, right? It can be anything of even if you're self-employed, there's burnout,
Mhm.
right? Like there's this like little thin line, like not line, there's like this underlying kind of message that we don't really talk about. It's like keep working. Play is not good. Like you're not productive. You cannot do that. And we know with like healing trauma and helping with the nervous system is play and joy and laughter. Those are foundational things to our health. And that's not talked about either. And so I actually find a lot of times when people are working these crazy hours and they're doing these things, they're relying heavily on caffeine, heavily on stimulants, and then they're coming down on alcohol or like marijuana or these things. It's like, and we're wondering why we feel like shit. We're wondering why our hormones are off, right? And I treat a lot of pelvic floor dysfunction, and with that, it's like if you're stressed all the time, you're clenching your ass all day and like your pelvic floor, and that can do that too. So looking at the person as an overall human and how that affects their bodies, it's wild when you really think about it that we're not talking about it.
Absolutely. It's become so normalized to work ourselves past our capacity, to the point that it's pretty much expected from most adults at this point. And especially when you bring in other factors, families, having kids, like all the working full time, it's kind of just normalized and even celebrated. And I think, again, especially in healthcare, but also very much in other industries and spaces as well. It's like, we kind of pedestal people who we perceive as really hard workers, really sort of self-sacrificing for the greater good or for what they are working for. And I think that really, again, that really becomes a limiting factor when we do eventually sit down and try to set boundaries, because there's so much messaging around us that this is what we should be doing, and then this is what it looks like to be a good contributor, or to again, like you said, be productive, is really the what we tend to reward.
Oh yeah, we reward it. And what we're not understanding, I think so much of this reward is like, and I mean, as physical therapists, we don't really get paid much in corporate anyway, but like in other industries too, is that like we almost justify it in certain industries because of, oh well, maybe the golden handcuffs, you've maybe heard that term, like maybe they make so much money that walking away would just be so hard. But I think what we also don't realize is there's different forms of currency, right? Health is our currency, relationships, time, and then money. And so if people are almost, I've seen people just justify it by being like, yeah, well, I have this certain lifestyle and this. I'm like, that's fine, but we have to understand how this is affecting your body. Your body is eventually going to break. It's either going to get sick, there's going to be pain or some type of illness, something like that, because we are not meant to sustain these crazy, crazy work hours.
Yeah, we are not robots. We have limitations, and we bring those limitations with us to work. I think we can sometimes get wrapped up in the idea that we like check our humanness at the door when we come to work. And all of a sudden those sort of basic needs, and as well social needs and psychological needs kind of don't matter in the space where we are at work, or they don't need to be addressed there. And I think that's really harmful, especially for many of us who spend a good amount of our waking hours at work.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever calculated, I think sometimes it helps people to even like gauge, like if you think about how many hours a week you're at your job, right? Maybe you hate the job or you're treated like shit. Um, and then you calculate that, right? So say you're working like 8-hour weeks, right? Times 52 weeks, right? Times how many, I'll do the calculation here. It's like, we'll say 70-hour weeks times 52, right? Times maybe we'll say 30 years or something. That's, you know, almost 110,000 hours in misery.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're spending more time at work than you are with your family, your friends, with vacations. I mean, even taking time off, I remember it was just like, I dreaded it because it just meant I was going to have to do a shit ton when I came back,
Yeah.
or
And
understaffed or things like that.
right. We often don't have like systems in place, even for people to need to slow down, which is, again, a normal thing for humans to go through in different phases of their life. Um, but yeah, I think we so often take it for granted that people will just be able to fulfill their role at the same level, and don't kind of put the supports in place to allow people to take time or take support themselves in what they might actually be needing.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of times just being submissive and just kind of dealing with it and just like don't upset anybody. There's this thing where I just felt like I was an outlier. I was like, wait a second, I'm sorry, like I am tired and I've done a lot of work and I'm very productive and you still want more. So it's almost like this perpetuating thing of like it's never enough. And then we wonder why we're tired. And if we break this down from like a nervous system standpoint, I mean, if like I remember specifically leaving the clinic one day and like grabbing coffee because I had a cancellation, and I walked into a coffee shop and I was like, how are all these people here midday? Like, why aren't they running around with their heads cut off like I am? And then that's when I was like, oh my God, is it possible where I don't have to run around all day with my head cut off or be back to back to back with calls or whatever it is? And if you're listening to this and you're like, that's not possible, you have to be working these crazy hours. Well, you're probably burnt out and you probably feel like shit. Like, unless you absolutely love what you're doing. But even if you absolutely love what you're doing, there's still like a shift of energy of kind of coming down off of it and like enjoying life again.
Yeah, I think it's a question of sustainability, because
Yeah.
I think anybody can do it for a short period of time. Some people can even do it for an impressive amount of time to me, but it's not, when we look at years, decades, that level of exertion, of using energy, of being activated in like a chronic sympathetic nervous system activation is it's just not sustainable. Like as humans, we at some point there is a breaking point. And so I think it's just important to start to, even if you're in that right now and it feels really hard to get out of it, to start to just think about what could even a slightly more sustainable version of this look like. Because yeah, if you're in that place where you are just running around all day and completely depleted, there's a good chance that at some point something is going to change, whether you initiate that change or not.
Well, something's got to give, right? This is usually when we find divorces happen more. We see children acting out. We see a variety of different things because when we have because something's got to give, right? We need it to be kind of full and complete in these different aspects, which is always really hard, right? Like sometimes we have to focus more on family because there's a dire emergency, and then sometimes work is a little bit more heavy. I know that there's times I myself have worked extra hours as an entrepreneur just because I got to get stuff done, but then I plan it out, or maybe I have like some recovery time, or maybe I have that next morning that I can do. And so we touched a little bit on kind of the nervous system and like, burnout, how it affects it. How have you seen this affect health?
So for me specifically, I think a lot about like my relational health. Um, as being one of the things that really suffered when I was burnt out. And the relational health of like people who are close to me, people in my life, who's I think again, it's just a question of like how much energy and bandwidth you actually have. And I was spending so much of my bandwidth on work and work related problems and thinking about work and ruminating on work and doing work, all of those things, that I didn't have the capacity to really engage in other relationships, to be able to you know, like engage thoughtfully with other people and to support them and anticipate their needs. Like those things all require energy, and again, we just have a limited amount of that. They require regulation of our nervous system, and we have limits in how much we can actively do that throughout our day. And so that's one that for me really stuck out. But beyond that, we also, you know, in the research see more issues with sleep, insomnia, cardiovascular health issues, you know, just kind of those, like you're, you know, more likely to deal with things like late onset diabetes, like all of those kind of persistent stress related conditions are more likely to come on earlier when we are dealing with just like this unabated chronic work stress response.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, there's a lot of people that I've talked to recently that eat pretty healthy and they exercise. And they're like, why is my A1C rising? So A1C is like, for
Mm-hmm.
people listening, it's how they measure your blood sugar over the last 3 months and come up with an average. And I'm like, we're not looking at the nervous system. If you're chronically excreting cortisol, that's going to increase blood sugar because it's giving you energy if as if you're running from a bear, and you're not running from a bear, you're just working insane hours and being treated potentially, you know, even working normal hours and being treated horribly in the workplace, right? So these burnouts can be a variety of things. Maybe you love your job, but your boss is an ass. Like there's just so many different aspects of it. But that's a big part that I don't think people look at, is like, well, why is my blood pressure rising? Well, let me put you on blood pressure meds. And I'm like, okay, well, what if your nervous system is heightened because you're chronically stressed, and you can throw meds at it and all these things, and you can be healthy and you can have a six pack. I say six pack because apparently that's what we think is healthy, you know, to have that. And it's like, you can look physically healthy and be very sick inside. And, you know, I didn't realize, like, with I've dealt with like chronic health issues on and off most of my life. And I realized so much of it was this energy expenditure of things that it was just too much, and not kind of having this balance. But I love what you said about relational health, because I think this is really important. If you find yourself without friends, or your relationships don't stick, or these different things, it could be something to consider, right? Like, I mean, I remember waking up and being like, man, I know a lot of people, but I sure as hell don't have close friends.
Yeah. And again, like the research around lack of social support or isolation, number one, again, the prevalence is like extraordinarily high for the amount of adults. I know specifically in America, but I'm sure it's a wider problem as well, that report low social support, and then the effect that we know that has on people's like physical health and mental health. And to your point, I think when people are looking at their health, you know, figures or pain or onset of disease, there's some things that we more, you know, that they tend to think about associated with their health, like their diet, like exercise. But something like the quality of your social interactions and relationships, and how bolstered and supported you feel by other people, is also um, a huge component of your individual health. And again, I think that's something that as a healthcare field, I don't think we really know how to how to even talk to people about that or how to address that in our patients or in ourselves.
Yeah, how do you go up to people and be like, I don't have friends? Like,
Yeah.
like there was a study, I think it's the same one you were talking about, and even Gen Zers are actually like they're dealing with this more. Where I don't want to just I'm going to throw out a random number. I don't know. I think they said something like 80% or something insane of people admitted they didn't have friends. And it's crazy because if so many people are working from home on top of it, right? And so it's like even more isolation, and we are literally like communal creatures. That is literally in our DNA, that we need social support. And I think we're in a reality of like, also, it's really hard to get social support because so many people themselves are dealing with burnout. So they don't even have energy to help with anybody else. I've seen that in my friends that are dear, dear friends. And I'm like, where are you? Like, I need you. And they're like, I don't know what's going on. And so there's also that aspect too, is like we're collectively trying to figure this out. And but I think it's important to talk about relational health, like you were saying.
Absolutely. And in order to have supportive relationships, you need capacity to pour into other people as well. Like, relationships, friendships are reciprocal. And if you are completely drained and all of your energy is going into work, it's again, uh, on one hand, relationships and social support is fulfilling, but it's also, it requires effort. It requires time and energy on your part as well. And we unfortunately we don't have a lot of spaces or a lot of guidance collectively on how to kind of sustain and form supportive adult relationships that are, again, sustainable and in the context of other pressures and other stressors in our lives.
Well, I think, we're talking about burnout in the workplace, but I think this can be across the board, right? Like burnout, even in like, because you can have friendships, but some can be even taking and like drain. You've heard of energy vampires. And so, like, boundaries wasn't even a thing that I even knew until I started listening to Brene Brown back in 2019. And that's when I was like, oh my God, we have that option. Like, I didn't know that there was this option that I can say, hey, this is what feels good for me, and this is what I need to do. And, what if somebody's at work, right, and they're experiencing these symptoms, and maybe I've had a lot of people say, like, hey, we're in a recession, like nobody's hiring. I'm worried I'm going to get fired. I don't want to just walk away. So realistically, a lot of times we have to meet people where they're at. Like quitting their job tomorrow, I think would be ideal for everybody, and then have this perfect job lined up. But the reality is that's not usually the way that it works. So what are some small ways people can protect their energy while they're maybe in a toxic workplace or being pushed around at work? Like, what are some things you can mention to them that they can even just change tomorrow?
I would say the first thing that I found really helpful in starting to set boundaries with work is to start small. So if like saying no to your boss feels really hard and really daunting, start with something that feels less intense. Start with a coworker. Start with a client. A relationship that feels, again, a little bit less less intense to say no in the context of. And then the other thing I would say is like as you're taking requests from people, which we all are throughout our day, requests that are big and small, it's what the idea with boundaries is that you are bringing an awareness to your actual capacity in that moment of the request, and you are doing a very brief analysis of like, am I responsible for this? Is this something that someone else can do? Can I give them a direction rather than actually doing this for them? Like, what are actually my options to respond here? And then doing your best to pick the one that most honors your responsibilities and your capacity and the person who's making the request. It's a practice. It is very much a practice, a trial and error. And it's uncomfortable, especially if it's not something you're used to. It can sometimes not work. Like, you can try to say no to something, and by the end of the conversation, you found that you kind of said yes to it. And I think just having a lot of like patience and grace for yourself as you start to practice. Again, just it can be as small as saying no to a little request that seems simple, but maybe it's during your lunch break, or maybe it's just something that is not your responsibility. And normally you would just say, okay, yeah, I can help you with that. But maybe you, again, pause and just say, like, I don't actually need to do that. I don't have endless capacity here, and this is something that I can defer to somebody else or whatever. So I would say those are, start with something small. Get ready for a little bit of discomfort. Get ready for it to be messy, and just a lot of sort of grace for yourself as you are going through that process. I think part of burnout is this like really intense judgment of ourselves, and that can really get in the way, I think, of people, especially if they are not in the current practice of doing boundaries, of actually getting started.
Well, I think like so many people that struggle with this tend to be people where they're people pleasers or they're people pleasers or perfectionists. And usually those are deeply rooted in some sort of unprocessed trauma of feeling like, oh, if I say no to some for the people pleaser, if I say no, I don't want anyone to hate me because my self-worth is based on how much people like me, right? There's like this subconscious thing. I say that because I'm a recovering people pleaser. And then there's the perfectionist who I'm also tend to kind of fall into that bucket too. But that's also, okay, well, why does this have to be so perfect? It's a product of what I've done, but it's not a reflection of who I am as a human. So I can separate those two and kind of look at it. But though I feel like those are the two types of people that really kind of, it tends to be in those situations. And so when we're sticking up for our boundaries and we're saying stuff, it can be incredibly uncomfortable. And it can even be, like you were just saying, start small. It can be something as simple as, I know a lot of people that use Slack or, email at work, and they're constantly, it's like, maybe you don't have to respond right that second to that email. Maybe you don't even have to tell anybody anything. Like, maybe it's just your mindset of like, I don't have to answer and jump and do this right now. Cause then what happens is that's almost expected after that.
Right. Right. And I think that's the other piece is if this is something new, it's pretty likely that people are going to have some kind of reaction to the change. If you are someone who always responded right away, or who responds at midnight to an email, and now all of a sudden it's different, I would expect some kind of response from that. And I think an important thing with boundaries is that I encourage people to implement in their work, especially, is like, you don't owe people an extensive explanation for why you're a human with limited needs and a limited or a limited capacity, excuse me. Like saying I'm not available, or saying I don't have I can't accommodate that right now is a full explanation for again saying no, or delaying a response, or any of those things.
I think people struggle with thinking boundaries means they're rude. You can be incredibly nice and set a boundary. Like, if somebody is, at work and telling you to do something that isn't your job, you don't have to say, this isn't my job, you do it. Like, then you're going to, it's also like a softness in how we say it too. There's an art a little bit to it, right? Because we're also dealing with humans with their own stuff, where you also don't want to tiptoe around what people say, people either. But Yeah, so it's more of like, hey, I'm not available, like, or, I don't, yeah, like you said, I don't have the ability to do this by that time. This is more real, this is when I can do that. So, if you, I think it's hard to not give an explanation when you first start practicing this, though, too. Like,
Yeah, and that's fine. And like again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like
yeah,
if you
yeah,
need to explain it a little bit, or just say what changed and what's different, like that's fine.
yeah.
I think I for me have found it really helpful to think about boundaries as like we're not doing this to punish other people or to
Mhm.
put them in their place or like because they're doing something wrong. We're setting boundaries in order to have a more sustainable work life, number one, and also healthier relationships with the people we're working with. And for me, I found that really helpful because I also struggled with that impulse of like, I don't want to be mean, like they have needs too, and their needs are just as important as mine or more important than mine. And I think that was something that kind of helped me reframe it a little bit was like, this is ultimately not about controlling other people. It's
Mm-mm.
about just honoring our own human uh, capacity.
Yeah, totally. I think it's not about anybody else. It's about filling up your own cup. And I think in healthcare, it can be hard because people be like, well, they need our help. And, I know somebody who is driving like 45 minutes to do this thing that's almost free just to kind of help somebody with their stuff that they're going through. But then they're coming back completely exhausted, not able to show up for their kids, or maybe they're just cranky and tired and not sleeping, whatever it is. It's like, okay, but so your body's taking it out in a different way. And so it's hard, I think, sometimes in healthcare because we're like, well, we want to help everybody. That's why we got into this profession. But also, we can't help anybody if we're not helping ourselves. And so it's undoing some of that pattern of like, hey, I don't want to hurt anybody else, but you're ultimately hurting yourself in the end. But I think like some sometimes people don't even know that they're burnt out, and like we talked about like some health conditions that can arise from that, but also like the other thing is anxiety, irritability, like adding on to your inability to sleep and things like that. And if you're finding yourself you're on edge all the time, this might be something to really consider, especially if there's no other conditions going on that could be affecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that irritability, that anxiety are big ones. I've always said like it's the feeling that like I'm not fully present when I'm at work, but also I like can't really shut off after work was a big like I was just like always sort of in this half on, half off space that was again like just no sense of recovery or relief even after a weekend, even after vacation. For me, it is a sign of burnout. I think you don't need to be like on the verge of, absolutely needing to quit your job tomorrow to have some degree of burnout affecting your life, your health, the quality of your relationships, all those things.
Yeah, I can tell even being self-employed, I can tell like my things of me being set off and I'm burning out is like I get more annoyed on the road and I honk more. I'm like, oh, okay. When did I become a honker here? Or yeah, having trouble just kind of being present, like you were saying, just kind of being present with people and my mind just kind of starting to go off and just feeling like this eh, like just feeling like I can't keep up. There's just so much going on. I gotta keep going. Oh my gosh, if I stop, then and I'm like, nobody else is telling me to do. I'm literally the boss of myself. So there's also like some people might be in a great workplace and it's look at the thumbs up that just popped up on the screen. I don't know how those bubbles pop up, by the way. They're just random.
I have no idea.
So yeah, like some of it can also be our own mindset around work too, that is causing our own burnout. And not to like shame people doing that. It's just that's just what I've done. I mean, I've been a business owner for 6 years and I catch myself going in and out of this. And it has actually been the most crucial factor to me maintaining my health. Like, because when I'm burnt out, I want to eat like crap.
Mhm.
Just want to veg out. What I mean, like watch some shows and just do nothing and yada yada. And that's all I would do. And I'm like, okay, it's being aware of it, I think, because we'll go in ebbs and flows of burnout in different aspects, but also bringing it to our attention, like, hey, this is also something really important that we need to talk about.
Absolutely. And I think to that point, like starting to draw the threads between our experience of work or experience of just our day-to-day life and other health behaviors. Because I'll see, people who are struggling with burnout, deciding, okay, I'm going to start to exercise, or I'm going to start to eat better or something. And it's really hard because they're still in this kind of persistent stress response, and that none of the factors that contribute to that are being addressed, and so that, like, whatever it is, the impulse to reach for the processed snacks or whatever is there, and it's strong, because these things all work together. So I think, to your point, just starting to notice those threads in your experience and your behavior, and how you kind of might make a more holistic approach to trying to, again, like address things or move in a different direction.
Yeah, I notice like when my nervous system is dysregulated or I'm stressed out, I crave, gosh, pizza, I crave sweets. And that's when I know that's a sign that I use as, oh, okay, I need to adjust something. I need to recalibrate. Right. I think their bodies give us messages. And if we listen to the messages and we adjust, then great. It's when we don't listen and we just keep plowing through life and just burning out in every aspect of our lives. I mean, you could go to the best specialist in the world and try to figure out what's going on, but ultimately it's a lifestyle shift. And it's so much like about, I think so much of it is doing inner work too. And like also like, hey, how can I stick up for myself? How can I overcome these people pleasing things? And I think for me, so much of recovering from people pleasing is realizing that if people were upset when I implemented a boundary, that's because they benefited from me losing myself. And I actually don't care what that person thinks, if anymore, if that was their intention. But I didn't know that when I first started. But you start realizing people might get mad, and people might get upset, but ultimately I truly believe when you do things with a kind heart and you do things for your best self and for you to live an abundant lifestyle and like with kindness to yourself, I truly believe things end up working out in the end. I mean, it's bumpy there for a while, but it's, you're staking your ground and sticking up for yourself and just noticing how that feels in your body when you're not being pushed around.
Yeah, yeah, that's a huge piece, again, and noticing how it feels when, and the effects when you do kind of go past your limits, or say yes to something you wish you said no to. I think, again, just that the awareness piece is such a big first step. And again, realizing that any sort of changes you're going to be trying to make, you are going to, again, you're a human, you have these social needs, and especially if you're introducing more discomfort in the form of trying to make some changes, like, you are absolutely going to need that support. And if you're struggling to make changes, that is, I think, one of the biggest components that is worth trying to address in some form, whether that's finding a therapist or finding a coach, or just starting to reach out to your friends or reach out to connections and trying to build those connections, can be really, really supportive if you're trying to uh, do hard things, like say no, and like overcome the sort of behavior habits that have come from just kind of a history of how you've learned to make it this far in the world.
Well, I think one of the explanations that I've really liked about like understanding kind of discomfort and like what that actually means for growth. And I don't know if you've heard of the growth edge. And
Mhm.
basically, like, just for people listening, is like, okay, maybe we stay in this small, if you think about like a little circle, right? That's your comfort. And then the outer edge, right? Your growth where you want to be is like a massive circle around it. To go to this bigger circle, right? That would be such a massive change for our nervous system that could cause complete dysregulation and just be overload, right? And kind of what you were saying before is start small. And so you kind of push when you push up against that growth edge, you're going to feel a little bit of anxiety. You're likely going to feel a little bit of discomfort in your body. And then you support your body and you kind of come back to that comfort, right? Come back to the comfort, come back to the things that calm your nervous system, whether it's exercise, breath work, community, whatever it is. And then when you need to push up again, you kind of go up again and then recover, right? If we go to these drastic extremes, I think that's when things get a lot more scary because we're like, oh my God, I don't want to feel that much discomfort. So start small, get your body used to that. Even I've even will tell people to just visualizing saying no, getting your nervous system used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like scripting things if you're it's hard to imagine it, just writing down, what you might say in the situation or what you expect from it, what you expect to feel from it, kind of preparing yourself in that way. Um,
I
yeah,
love
but
that.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
agree. A comfort zone is important. It's just as important as pushing into discomfort is also having that kind of home, that safe space, so to speak, to restore yourself.
Yeah, I find more people would rather feel the discomfort ongoing, and just like, let me just not deal with it. Let me just kind of suppress it. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And it's like, well, it's really not over time, but you kind of learn and trying not to shame yourself, like you were saying, as you might realize later, why did I say yes to this? Be gentle with yourself, right? Like you're learning where these are new concepts that haven't been talked about very often or at all, you know? Um, so I'm a firm believer that health is beyond diet and exercise and in fulfillment in your work and feeling seen and heard in basically all aspects of your life. And so I believe that true health is a lot of showing up authentically as yourself. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit before, earlier here, but like what are your thoughts on this and maybe how it affects burnout in the workplace or life?
Yeah, I think again, I mean, I'm sure we could trace this back from where it came from, but I think some point along the way we learned that like it is not professional to bring your full human self to work. And um, I think that a lot of people have internalized that message and see that being kind of played out around them and are, trying to embody something that is like a professional in their space that is not that really requires them to make themselves smaller. And obviously, on one hand, we're not trying to go to work and be completely unfiltered and, completely unregulated and, just our full, exposed, messy selves. Like that's there, there
There's
is
a
some
there's a line, yeah.
there's a line and there's discernment, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's I think again, you are spending so much time at this space for you to really have to like suppress your who you are is going to have negative impacts because that's exhausting. It's really exhausting to try to shapeshift yourself for other people's expectations or for a certain image. And it's again true in all aspects of life. I think it's particularly normalized in the workspace of like not being authentic is again rewarded if it's closer to some version of conformity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If you don't conform, then you're an outlier. When you're an outlier, you get pushed out. And what is the scariest thing that we can be? We can be isolated. Well, we're already becoming isolated because we're burning out. So it's like, it's this circle that just kind of never ending. But No, I think what we talked about today, just kind of, in summary of a lot of what we discussed, is recognizing signs of burnout. That can be high blood pressure, that can be early onset diabetes, that can be anxiety, depression, irritability, a variety of things. A lot of times these things are not looked at when we're looking at health and understanding what's going on. And looking at other things that are affected by work, not just financially, but also relationships, time, your health. Plus, then we look at, work and things like that and how that comes into play. And, you know, one of the other things that we had talked about is like with boundaries, like setting up small boundaries first. You're going to come up with some resistance, support your body after, notice that discomfort. That discomfort means growth. If you feel you're chronically overwhelmed, it could be that, I personally think it could be that growth edge. Maybe we pushed it too far and then we're trying to kind of re-regulate. So it's not uncommon to kind of feel that dysregulation after that. And then, like we were just saying, is being able to kind of show up as a human, right? Because we are, and we have to be able to be ourselves as well with discernment, right? We don't need to like show up and like let everybody, everybody's got shit they're dealing with too, right? So there's a line with that, but also respecting the humanness in us and community. And yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of bring up based on burnout in the workplace?
I think just the last thing that I would add is to just go back to what we said at the beginning, which is that if you relate to what we have talked about in this episode, like if you have noticed that irritability, or you've noticed, like more conflict in your life, or just, again, health effects, like it can really feel like you are the problem. And this is a very big, widespread problem. It is not like a issue with who you are, or like something you are doing wrong. I think that is just a really important message. Like, even though we're talking about things that you can do to support yourself, I think it's also important to realize that you're not alone, and that ultimately what we need is like wider spread changes to the way that we set up our work environments and our lived environments that is more supportive of people, and that is not normalizing and celebrating this sort of like perpetual overwork. And so I think I would just, again, reemphasize that you are not alone, like you are not a problem. And there is also hope, and there are things that you can do to support yourself.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, you're not the problem. You're asking for support. If you're gaslit, I've had that done too. It's like, that's on them. Right. And just keep going. If you feel like you don't have support, or you don't have a community, and then work is stressful, keep going. There are good people out there that are people that are doing this work. It's becoming more and more evident that people are. It just takes time to kind of find those workspaces and those people in those communities. So how can people find you? And, if you want to let everybody know where they can reach you.
Yeah, so I am Meredith Grossman PT on Instagram, and I have a website on as well that is healthcareunraveled.com, and you can find me there.
Great. And then what would you say like your main services that you offer for burnout, so people know what to look for?
Yeah, so right now I have been running a program called Burnout Masters. I just wrapped up the second sort of cohort of it. Going into the new year, I'm looking to do some more kind of smaller scale webinars around burnout, specifically in healthcare. And so you can follow me on Instagram and look out for notifications about that stuff coming up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Meredith. This has been awesome. I'm excited to share this with everyone.
Thank you for having me on.
You've been listening to TMI Talk with your host, Dr. Mary Grimberg. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Dr. Mary, head on over to drmarygrimberg.com. And make sure to follow Dr. Mary at Dr. Mary PT on all social channels. To learn more about Dr. Mary's integrative practice for pain relief in Austin, Texas, head on over to resilient-rx.com. Thanks for listening.